You were the first senator to object to the votes. In 2024, will you certify the election results? Do you plan to object, or will you accept the results regardless of who wins the election?
So Caitlin, I got to say, I think that's actually a ridiculous question.
It's a yes or no question, though.
No, it's not. Let me explain why it's a ridiculous question. It's not a question. Have you ever asked a Democrat that?
Of course.
What Democrat?
But what Democrats?
Hold on a second. What Democrats challenge it?
What Democrats? I know. I've been down this road many times. But no Democrat. You cannot compare the two situations. We have talked about that. We've seen the audio of that when they protested on the Senate floor.
Hold on a second.
But has you ever had a sitting president who refused to facilitate the peaceful transition of power, refused to acknowledge that his successor won the presidency?
So we did have a peaceful transfer of power. I was there on January 20th. I was there on the swearing in.
Barely.
B, if you look at in 2000, Democrats went to the Senate, or 2001, Democrats went to the Senate floor and objected to George W. Bush. In 2004, they went and objected.
And what did the president do?
In 2016, Democrats went and objected to Donald Trump. And so... Look,
and what happened in 2016? Because I remember a guy named Joe Biden was vice president, and he went to the Senate floor and certified the votes.
So do you
Am I wrong?
So you're asking, will you promise no matter what to agree an election is illegitimate regardless of what happens? And that would be an absurd thing to claim. Like, we have an entire election law system that people challenge elections. Elections get overturned. Voter fraud gets proven. That happens all the time. And the media engages in this weird game post Donald Trump that you insist no voter fraud has ever existed. Why does every state have laws in place to challenge voter fraud if it occurs?
The media
Why do you have election challenges?
This isn't a game. There was no widespread voter fraud.
You only ask Republicans that.
Because it was Republicans who tried to block the transition of power. You have to acknowledge that. So we've never seen it on a scale of what happened in 2020, and we've never seen the president refuse. He wouldn't even let Joe Biden get classified briefings at the beginning. I recall that. So my question for you again, free and fair election, will you accept the results regardless of who wins?
Look, if the Democrats win, I will accept the result, but I'm not going to ignore fraud regardless of what happens.
Was there fraud in 2020?
Of course there was fraud in 2020.
No, there wasn't, and you still objected.
You know for a fact there was zero voter fraud. Really? What's your basis for that? Show me your evidence.
We've spoken with Governor Kemp. They did 3 hand recounts in the state of Georgia. The director of CISA said that it was the safest, most legitimate election in
But you're saying zero voter fraud occurred. That's what you just said.
Nothing that would have changed the outcome of that election.
Okay, but that's a different statement.
But no, it's not. Because
yes, it is. You said there was no voter fraud.
There was no voter fraud that would have changed the outcome of the election, and you know that, Senator.
So what I know is that what I stood on the Senate floor and objected, what I called for, I'll tell you, I wrestled with what to do in that circumstance. And the reason I wrestled with it is because I think there was significant voter fraud in 2020. And
you wanted the 10-day commission, I know, but was there voter fraud that would have changed the outcome of the election? But you know why I wanted a 10-day commission? Because I tried to look, I'm a Supreme Court litigator. I argue cases in front of the Supreme Court. I know.
I tried to look through history and precedent, and the best precedent I could find was the election of 1876. 1876 was between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden. And what happened there were serious allegations of voter fraud, and Congress didn't throw its hands up and say, you know what? CNN demanded that I accept the results no matter what, so ignore the fraud. I got to go. But hold on. What did Congress do in 1876?
How did the president handle it?
What did Congress do in 1876?
Senator, I know you can't answer yes or no to this question.
I'm asking a question. What did Congress do in 1876?
You can't answer yes or no to this question. And Republicans,
can you answer my question? Why are you refusing to answer my question?
I'm conducting the interview with all due respect, Senator. And let me ask you, it's Republicans have twisted themselves in knots. It's just a yes or no question.
I'm answering your question. You just don't like my answer.
And what's your answer? Is it yes or is it no?
So in 1876, what Congress did is it appointed an election commission. It consisted of 15 people. 5 House members, 5 senators, 5 Supreme Court justices. The Election Commission was charged with studying the evidence and making a determination of what voter fraud occurred, and that determined the winner. And what I called for in 2020 was to do the same thing, appoint an election commission, and 11 senators joined me.
Senator, with all due respect, after it had been thrown out of many courts, after the Attorney General Bill Barr, because there was no basis for those court cases.
So that's actually
Senator,
not.
With all due respect,
you asked me a question. Do you want me to answer it?
And you didn't answer the question.
Yes, I did.
Court cases were thrown out.
Hold on a second.
The Attorney General said there was no widespread fraud. You're not clearly answering the question. I want to thank you for that.
I'm answering every question. I think the country would have been a lot better off with a determination of what evidence of voter fraud there was that occurred, and instead the media didn't want to hear it and insists voter fraud never occurs. You got to go back and look at the Carter-Baker Commission.
It was the Attorney General, and my question was about 2024.
It was the media. It was CNN that relentlessly pushed that propaganda. And by the way,
what propaganda? That there was no widespread fraud in the election?
That voter fraud doesn't exist, and anyone who says it does is wearing a tinfoil hat. That is propaganda. And by the way, you never asked Hillary Clinton this. You never asked Stacey Abrams this. You never asked Al Gore this.
With all due respect,
and every
Senator,
one of them said the Republicans who won were illegitimate.
I haven't had any of them on my show. We'll talk to them, but I don't remember there being a president who was refusing to turn over the transition of power and facilitated it.
And Trump didn't either. Joe
My
Biden
question was about 2024. You did not answer.
Let me say a final point for you. You said they haven't come.
Thank you very much, Senator Ted Cruz.
My opponent, Colin Allred, hasn't either. He ought to come to your show.
Senator Ted Cruz, no answer to that question. Thank you very much.
This is CNN's Caitlin Collins not allowing Ted Cruz to spew his usual bad faith bullshit despite his relentless attempts to do exactly that, all to justify his wholly unjustifiable complicity in Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. For example, Cruz hangs his hat on this bizarre semantic argument where he insisted there was fraud. In other words, so long as there was a single instance of fraud, then that's apparently enough of a predicate to refuse to certify the election results. Caitlin Collins eventually states the obvious, that there wasn't enough fraud to actually alter the outcome of the election, but Ted isn't concerned about that reality. He just wants to glom onto any kernel of a conspiracy theory so that he can give himself cover for doing what he did, which is to assist Donald Trump in his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. If there were 10 instances of fraud in a state, is that really a logical rationale to refuse to certify the results? Of course not. But he's not looking for logic, he's just driven by his own boundless partisan hackery. Ted then says this.
Is that what I stood on the Senate floor and objected, what I called for, I'll tell you, I wrestled with what to do in that circumstance. And the reason I wrestled with it is because I think there was significant voter fraud in 2020.
Ted may have thought there was significant voter fraud in 2020, but remember, the Trump campaign and its allies took this issue to court in about 65 different cases. They won all of one, and that case shortened the cure deadline in Pennsylvania from 9 to 6 days. That's it. They weren't able to prove a single case alleging fraud. And mind you, that was in front of a number of judges who Donald Trump himself appointed. So I get that Ted thinks the fact that he thought there was significant fraud carries weight, but it carries about as much weight as me thinking that I can play basketball. But if you asked anyone with eyes, they would tell you I can't. I believe it was Ted's friend Ben Shapiro who once mused, "Facts don't care about your feelings." And then, of course, Ted goes on some filibuster with Caitlin Collins about how precedent from the 1800s means that we should have had a 10-day commission where we really dug into the intricacies of what's happening. Let's be perfectly clear. All of Ted Cruz's bullshit aside, the reason that he wanted this commission was not because it had historical precedent. The reason he wanted it was because Republicans believed the more they could delay, the more they could sow doubt in the election results, which would ultimately help Donald Trump in his efforts to overturn the results. Need proof? No problem. On December 27, 2020, Donald Trump was on a call with Acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen and Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donoghue. Donoghue took contemporaneous notes which were provided to the House Oversight Committee, and those notes show that Trump pressured Rosen and Donoghue to falsely declare the election illegal and corrupt, even after the Justice Department had not uncovered evidence of widespread voter fraud. Quote, "Just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressmen." In other words, this was all part of Donald Trump's scheme. Ted Cruz wasn't giving this thoughtful consideration based on historical precedent. Give me a fucking break. He was being a hack for Trump, who told his plan to DOJ officials, and Ted was helping him execute it. He is a criminal accomplice and nothing more. And of course, what would be a Republican appearance on TV without some whataboutism? Ted tries to liken what Trump did with what Hillary Clinton or Stacey Abrams did. I think the only point worth making here is that neither one of them incited insurrections because they couldn't get over the fact that they lost. So Ted can finger point all day long to try and absolve responsibility off of himself, but if he wants to talk precedent, there is zero precedent in this country for what Trump and his Republican accomplices did after the 2020 election. These people are enemies of democracy. The only people in the history of this more than 200-year-old experiment who refuse to abide by the peaceful transfer of power. If Ted wants to talk precedent, he helped create the most undemocratic, anti-American, sick, twisted precedent in the history of this country. That's his legacy. So while I appreciate Caitlin Collins holding Ted Cruz's feet to the fire, there's probably little value in allowing someone as disingenuous, shameless, and depraved as Ted Cruz on air. He's not a good faith actor. He is a smarmy, self-important, dangerous hack whose sole priority is consolidating power for himself and his party. The silver lining here is that hopefully at least a few more people were able to see that. I've got a really exciting announcement. I've written a book. It's called Shameless. This book explores how Republicans have exploited their historical branding while attacking our democracy, how the media has proven itself a willful participant, and how Democrats can learn from this to rebalance the political scales and save our democracy. It has been a lifelong dream of mine to write my own book, and so I'd like to ask you to pre-order it by clicking the link right here on the screen. And if you buy within this pre-order period, your book is going to come with a signed nameplate. As you know, I've never had a single sponsor on my channel. I don't ask for money or anything like that, but if you're looking for a way to support me, this is hands down the best way to do it. So again, follow the link right here on the screen, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for pre-ordering Shameless. And as always, make sure to subscribe to see more of my content.